So good afternoon. My name is Mark Schultz. I'm the president of Science Europe, and I would like to welcome you for this workshop on aligning research data management across Europe. I would first of all, of course, thank the organizers, which is the Science Europe team, but also the experts and all those who will participate, who will present and participate in panel discussions later, and of course all those who have connected, who have joined us this afternoon here in Europe. We have now more than 224 participants connected. We had about 300 registrations, which is a very significant number, not just from Europe, because we also have registered participants from as far as Israel, South Africa, and Nepal. So wherever you are, I don't know whether it's good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you are in the world, that these number of participants alone underline how important the topic is that we are going to discuss this afternoon. Research data management is something which isn't entirely new to Science Europe. We have been working over the past years on this topic, and in particular by jointly providing a practical solution, which was the guide on the international alignment of research data management, of which we will have today published an update with a new chapter, because it is a topic which is in constant evolution, so to speak, and it is a topic which is, I think we can all agree, more important than ever. Some say that research, or some say that data are the oil or petrol of the 21st century. Of course, most of us are in the public research sector, so we don't sell oil. But nevertheless, we are now fully aware, everyone in the research sector is now fully aware that research data is an important asset for each research institution. And we've seen how that asset can be put to very good use over the past months, where there has been an exceptionally large moment of sharing research data in connection with the COVID-19 pandemic, and much of the progress that has been made over the past months in understanding the virus and the pandemics, and also in finding means to tackle the pandemic, has been resting on the enormous amount of data that has been generated in a relatively short time, and in particular also that we've been able to share much of these data in between research teams all over the globe, and I think this alone stresses the importance of the topic that is under discussion this afternoon. We had, of course, within Science Europe, open science and research data have always been very high on our agenda. Many of our member organizations have become members of the EOSC association, which is a long-term endeavor of which we will hear a little bit more later during the long-term endeavor to create infrastructure, or at least to align infrastructure so that we can share data in an easy and a highly interoperable way. We published the first edition of this practical guide for the international alignment of research data in 2019, and it was, I think, to very happy actually that it has been put to very good use, because it has actually been taken up by many of our member organizations who have made it theirs, so who have integrated it in their own policies and in their own guidelines for researchers, so that we have indeed succeeded in creating a kind of not too complex, because it was always our aim to remain relatively simple, but a not too complex guide for researchers of what our expectations as funding and performing organizations are when it comes to research data management. There were also simple guidelines in that guide regarding data repositories. So what are really the essential expectations and criteria that we would see as important for data repositories. Now we've ended it now with a new chapter. We'll hear more about that, which is also important, which is a chapter about evaluation and assessment of research data management plans, because that's something which is of importance both to funding and performing organizations, foremost to performers, because many universities and research institutions now have what we call data stewards. So they are setting up specially trained people to take care of the data management. So we hope it will be to use for all these people involved in managing data, and also to organizations like funding organizations, of which it is a remit to assess whether data management plans satisfy a minimum number of criteria. I should maybe also mention that it has been taken up by the European Commission as well as a guideline. So we'll hear about that a little bit later, and how it will be part or integrated in the Horizon Europe Framework Program. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Thierry Damerval, who is the President and CEO of the French National Research Agency, ANR. And ANR has been one of the, how shall I say, front runners in adopting the research data management guidelines issued by Science Europe. They have within the agency gathered now experience on how it can be used, and I think they have also been at the forefront of drafting this new chapter about assessment and evaluation. So we will be very keen to hear from Thierry Damerval about their experience at ANR. So Thierry, I hand over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mark, and good afternoon. And I've understood that it's also good morning or good evening for some of you. So first of all, I would like to thank Mark, the President of Science Europe, and the team of Science Europe for this invitation. I would also like to recall that the DMP developed by Science Europe is a result of a collaborative work between Science Europe and one of its members, NWO, from Netherlands. And really, I would like to salute the commitment of Stan Gillen, who was at this time head of NWO. So, of course, the concept of a data management plan is not new. It was originally developed for the conduct of large engineering projects. Then the emergence of big data extended this notion to other disciplines. But I think that the most striking development is the shift in the last few years from data management plans established for the needs of specific research projects to the notion of a DMP, which is now necessary for the implementation of every research project, so that they can be open, accessible, beneficial for the whole scientific community and society. Next slide, please, Lydia. And of course, you all know what is fair. The management of research data today represents a major challenge to ensure scientific integrity, to guarantee trust in science, to answer the questions that citizens may ask, and in a word, to fully meet our responsibility to society. The time when the scientists could afford to simply state a result is over. He must now explain the process and demonstrate its credibility. So of course, we also must explain that the DMP is not an additional administrative burden, but is a benefit for the researcher and science in general, and really that it is an indispensable prerequisite for the provision of fair data. Why? Because it avoids data loss, of course, it allows reproducibility, then it has the skill to characterize, preserve, and share data now and in the future, and knowing who owns this data. Then, of course, it's facilitate data exchange for collaborative and interdisciplinary projects. It's the eye of FAIR. And finally, the definition of standards and harmonized technical frameworks to ensure dissemination and reuse to favor rationalization and trust. And as Mark said, of course, the COVID crisis clearly reinforced this need. The urgency has led to ask any researcher to disseminate his results as quickly and widely as possible, even before the usual peer review processes. And we have, as many others, subscribe to this approach. But it's undoubtedly raised the question of the compatibility between urgent reaction, rapid and wide sharing of results on one hand, and the capacity to analyze and regulate research data and what is done with it on the other hand. And for that, the best answer is to have a very robust process, visible, of the way of doing research. So just a few words about our own open science policy and DMP policy. In France, within the framework of the National Open Science Plan decided at the government level in July 2018, we have been led to clarify our policy, taking particular care again to ensure that it is not perceived as an additional constraint for a researcher. Since 2019, all publications resulting from projects we fund must be available in open access. But open access to publications is an issue, of course, but open data is equally, if not more important. And now the provision of a DMP is now mandatory for us, 6 months after the start of the project. Of course, consultation with all stakeholders has been a key element. We are the main funding agency in France, but there are different administration or institutions funding also research projects. And for more than 2 years now, we have been coordinating with these different entities in order to fully align our requirements and ensure that the same policies are deployed by all in terms of open science. And the CNRS, with its National Institute for Scientific and Technical Information, has worked very closely with us to develop a computer tool, really to help researchers for the constitution of a DMP. That's completely for all the researchers using DMP in France. And finally, last point is that internal coordination is also an essential factor. We appointed an open science project manager within within ANR, but coordinating all the departments, it's very important that not only scientific officers are involved, but also legal affairs, contract, grant agreements, finance, and so on. Next slide, please. Of course, the one question was, which DMP template to adopt? Should we develop our own template with our own specificity? And of course, for an agency like us, like many others, which funds all areas of research, DMP must be adaptable to different domains of research. So more than 1 year ago now, almost 2 years ago, we asked the Open Science Committee, which brings together about 200 researchers, what their recommendations were for implementing a DMP. And their response was, without any ambiguity, to take the Science Europe model as our own template, and in fact, as a national template. This gives us a template for DMPs that was already worked on, thought out, and ready to be implemented. And the fact that there is a concerted approach at the European level, led by Science Europe, and that the European Commissions support this approach has been a very important element for the deployment of the DMP, this DMP coordinated at the national level and accepted by all institutions. This need for DMP is, as I said, now fully integrated in all our call for proposal, grants, agreements, and our financial regulation, with again the provision of this tool developed by CNRS to facilitate the work of researchers and again adopted by all research institutions. Just two words at this stage. The need to harmonize as much as possible our request in terms of DMP. This is why I'm strongly advocating that the model and guides established by Science Europe be adopted and deployed as much as possible in different countries. This will be a source of clarity, simplification, and efficiency for science in Europe and I hope beyond. Second element, which is very important to remember systematically. Open data doesn't mean opening all data. There may be legitimate reasons to delay or restrict access, but the principle, as open as possible, as closed as necessary, can be only effective if the data has been characterized, if we have mastered the processing, and if we know the regulatory, ethical, economic condition for the use. And that's the main, the DMP is really the way to analyze these different questions. Last slide, please. Of course, this day is very important for this new edition of the Science Europe Practical Guide. I will not present the new version, that will be done in a few minutes, but just a few comments. As Mark says, the first edition was published exactly 2 years ago, and it has quickly taken by numerous RFO and RPO. It has been referenced by the European Commission. This new version has been extended and adapted following back feedback received from Science Europe member organization and other research stakeholders. Really, for me, this guide is simple, clear, and adapted to different types of research and scientific disciplines. So really, congratulations to all of those who contributed to it. Finally, I would like to emphasize of course, a chapter devoted to the evaluation of DMP. Today, at least for us, the DMP is not a criterion for evaluating research project. As I said, we ask that the DMP and its mandatory be established and sent to us within 6 months after the start of the project. For example, at this time, for the project that began in 2020, we have currently received almost 1,000 DMPs. So it's more than, it's almost 80% of the funded projects, because some of them, of course, started in the last few months of last few weeks. But we are now going to undertake an analysis of this project, and of course, the evaluation guide will be extremely useful, and it will be, of course, our basis of work. We will clearly use it. Finally, of course, a major question is the question of infrastructure and infrastructure coordination. It's a key issue for data storage and accessibility, but we'll have a specific presentation of EOSC, which is for us also a strategic point. So as an overall conclusion, I mentioned in my introduction that the historical shift from the establishment of DMP for the specific needs of research projects to a sharing, wild sharing of data for all research projects is something very important. We are facing a new and major challenge in sharing data for science. And again, this is a huge issue for trust in science. So again, thank you very much to Science Europe for all this work. Thank you very much to all of the people who have been involved in the preparation and of this new version. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Thierry, for both your very interesting introduction and, of course, for the continued support by ANR for all the work that Science Europe is doing around research data. Also from me, a good afternoon to everyone, or good morning and good evening to some. My name is Marie Timmerman. I'm a Senior Policy Officer at Science Europe in charge of the research data file. And before I hand over and introduce the first presentation, I would like to echo something that Mark said at the very beginning, and also personally thank the Science Europe Working Group on data sharing and supporting infrastructures under the chairmanship of Stefan Winkler-Nees for this fantastic work. I have to say it's really a pleasure to work with such a group of really committed experts. A particular thanks today, of course, to the task group that led the development of this new chapter of the RDM guide. And I think that's one of the reasons you're here today. So without further ado, I will hand over to Geraldine Clément Stoneham, who was coordinating this task group over the last 1.5 years, and ask her to present this work. So Geraldine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marie, for this introduction. I hope you can all see the slides. The technology is always one of the first challenges to overcome when we do this kind of presentation. So, as Marie said, I had the pleasure to be involved in a task group that has developed the additional section of the Science Europe guide in the last year or so that we've been together. And today is really quite an important milestone for us because that work has been completed and we have the opportunity to tell you a bit more about it. Now, the context of it has been very well demonstrated by Thierry Desmarval just now about the importance of good practice in data management and how that is kind of related to the trust that we have in science. And the aims of the guide that we had put together was really to help on the one hand, the researchers and make their life easier in meeting the requirements that increasingly are being put on them, both from funders but also research organization perspective, but also to make the life easier for those organizations in assessing the research the researchers' approach to their data management. Now, the guide, when it was first set up 2 years ago, was really there to promote that alignment around research data management policies and the practices amongst all the stakeholders, and make sure that, in particular, when we know that science and research is a very international endeavor, that regardless of which funder, which collaboration was taking place, there was some consistency in the expectations, which will then make life easier for the research community, but also in aligning when funding decisions are made, for example, or when data is being accepted in a repository. The guide therefore kind of aimed at both supporting compliance with requirements, but also to make the researchers life easier in the sense of taking them through the various processes and the thinking process that are required. That first edition, as we said, 2019, then was organized around different sections. One was around the core requirements for data management plan, the principles, the type of information and the type of thinking that researchers ought to put in place when they're preparing their research proposal and making sure that the way they intend to manage their data will support the objectives of their research proposal. But also a section around how to select potentially a trustworthy repositories when their project is complete, or when there is sufficient data that's been collected that is ready to be made available to others for reuse. Then having a guide that helps identifying the right environment for that data to be preserved was quite important for us. And then the kind of flip side of the principles was also a very much more practical guidance for the researchers on how to translate those core requirements into a data management plan or into that selection of the final repository for the data. And I guess we were surprised, but in a very positive way, of how quickly the guidance have been taken up by a number of organizations and being validated as a reference by the European Commission as part of their, and used by many as part of their training material. And I think that that take-up has been a good reward for the work that had been put into developing it, but also clearly showed that there was a need for more guidance in that area. Now, today we are talking about the new extension to the DMP, or the DMP guide, which is the evaluation rubric. So we had quite a bit of feedback from various stakeholders on the use of the guidance, and part of that was also that the step that was missing in what we had produced was, once the DMP has been prepared, how do we guide those that are going to be reviewing those DMP, that are going to be reading them, and that are going to have as a task to advise the researchers as well, and potentially make recommendation in areas that they've missed or that they've fallen slightly short, and accompany those reviewers through that process as well. We decided to write, therefore, a new section, which is very much based on the existing structure of the guide as it is so far. And the intention here was also to help through the thinking and the review and the evaluation of those data management plan, to ensure that the FAIR principles are met in the approach that is being proposed by the research team and their plan. Now, the rubric itself, the decision to choose rubric as a template was really based on, first, some existing precedents, and NWO has been mentioned. Wellcome had also produced one, and rubrics are quite an accepted way of evaluating, particularly in education. And we thought that by going through this model, it would enable people to see, to be able to identify whether the elements of information that were provided were actually meeting the requirements, but also help understand where they might be falling a little bit short. We have organized it around two sections. One is in terms of performance level, sufficiently addressed or insufficiently addressed. It's a spectrum, and there will always be an element of judgment in terms of the information that's being provided, but then the guide itself is quite clear about the different sections, and the rubric questions are there to help someone evaluating the plan to sort of formulate those questions in a more kind of natural language of is this information there, and what kind of information am I supposed to be able to see within a particular section. In this context, insufficiently would mean either that there is a lack of information, it's not complete and it's not specific enough, or actually that it might be information is provided but it's perceived to be evaluated as incorrect information. Now, something important is around the use of the rubric. I mean, the intention here, as I've sort of put forward so far, is that really it's there to help a thinking process. It's not meant to be a tick box exercise, and we would really encourage those that are using the rubric to see it as an opportunity to comment on feedback to the researchers and highlight areas of a data management plan where they felt that actually they needed more information to understand what was being proposed in the way that the data would be managed or would be shared. And the way we structured it as well is to enable for the rubric to be used at different stages of a data management plan. Sometimes and the life cycle of a particular research project. Sometimes it might be at the application stage, sometimes it might be after an award has been made, but sometimes it might be later on in a particular research project, because a DMP might have to be reviewed in light of changes that happen in the research activities itself. So the way it's been drafted is so that it should be, in theory, and hopefully we'll see in practice, that the template can be used and the rubric can be used at any time during that life cycle of the project. And then finally, I think an important element as well is that what we've kept in mind while we were drafting it was, one, that we were drafting it alongside the guide itself, and therefore we were not intending to modify the guide, but to sort of develop those criteria on assessing the principles that have been developed there, but also to draft it in such a way that is, you know, at a level that it can be used by all the different stakeholders, but with the intention that it could be adapted to local requirements. It has that flexibility that you might need for your own purpose to reflect the activities and the governance that is in place in a particular organization or the requirements of a particular funder, then to adapt the rubric and add section, or actually assess that some sections are not so relevant because you've got other ways of monitoring potentially what happens, or ensuring that the project will be managing the data in a particular way. So hopefully that forms a good basis from which to start with, and it potentially might be enough as it is, particularly for those organizations that have implemented the guide in a very similar fashion, but it is there to be adapted. And for that reason, Science Europe has also made those templates available in a Word format on the website to make sure that that you can download and reuse in a way that is meant to be more adapted to your organization. So having covered the overall and described the overall aim and how it's been expressed in the actual document of this rubric, I now have the pleasure to be joined by three colleagues who have also worked on the development but have had the opportunity to apply these data management plan but rubric as well in their own organization. So I am going to stop sharing and invite Katharina, Maria, and Patricia to join me. Welcome. I encourage you to make sure you unmute when you start talking. And as a first step, would you like to introduce yourself for our audience, please?
Hello, my name is Katharina Rick. I work for the Austrian Science Fund, as Open Science Manager. And as Geraldine was mentioning, I was part of the working group that developed this evaluation rubric.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maria Cruz. I work for NVO, the Dutch Research Council. I was also part of the task group that developed the rubric.
Hi, I'm Patricia Clark. I'm the Programme Manager for Policy and EU Funding at the Health Research Board in Ireland. I'm part of the wider science group, but not part of this task force that developed the refresh of these guidelines. But within the HRB, myself and my colleague Annalisa Montesani have used the rubric within our processes.
So all three of you have very kindly accepted to be part of this session today to talk about your sort of first-hand experience in assessing and reviewing data management plan, or at least within your organisation. And I think that's a great opportunity for us to sort of cover some of the opportunities that you've identified, some of the challenges as well. So Katerina, if I may start with you first, So FWF was one of the first organisations to implement the Science Europe Guide in January 2019. And I was just wondering what sort of incentive you had to do so, and why did you feel that, why are the DMP so important for FWF?
For FWF, data management in general is very important because we consider the management of research data and also the sharing of research data as one of the key principles of good scientific practice or good research practice. And sharing and reuse of research data in general are just essential to verify research findings and also to foster new research. So that's why it's very important for us, or it was very important for us to also then introduce a data management plan. As you mentioned, we did that in 2019, but there was a lot of work done before that also already. We had a recommendation for sharing open data openly since 2004 when we introduced our open access policy. In 2016, we had an open research data pilot program. That program helped us to also gain more experiences with research data management on the one hand, also with making how to best make data openly available. And then we were very happy to actually have the Science Europe Guide also as a very helpful tool to use to create our own data management plan. And we also have a template. And this is now there since 2019. And we just think such a tool is a data management plan is just the perfect tool for the support of research data management, because it's just a very structured way of guiding researchers through the whole planning of the data life cycle, from collecting or generating the data to archiving data or to storing data. So we really see the benefits of having this kind of data management plan now in place, and we also get a lot of good feedback from researchers.
Thank you. And would you have any particular lesson learned that you've identified and you'd like to share with other organizations?
Yes. So first, that's something that is probably not a big surprise, but it was not a big surprise for us either, is that a lot of researchers are still very unfamiliar with data management plans and with writing a data management plan. So what is really important is to have a clear guidance, to have those leading questions that are also part of the Science Europe Guide that guides researchers in the direction of what needs to be in a data management plan. But on top of that, it's also very important to show examples. So how can a good data management plan look like? Or also provide links to websites where terms like metadata or licensing for data are explained, because these are all terms that a lot of researchers have not come across, and it's not clear to them always what that actually means. But apart from written guidance, we also see that it's just essential to have people in the research institutions, data stewards, or also at funders, that can provide information or help researchers when writing their data management plans. So in Austria, we are building up this network of data stewards, or there are people around in the different research institutions that can be contacted when it comes to data management plans, and that's just simply very important.
Thank you, and that I think is an important point, is that the documentation, if we like, in themselves are often not enough, and that interaction and that conversation with someone who understands them well can be what makes the difference. I was moving on to Maria and NWO's experience. You also implemented the guide very early and developed a DMP evaluation rubric, which actually served as the basis of the Science Europe work. Just wondered, was there a demand for such evaluation tool, and if so, who was asking for it and gave you the impetus to develop it?
Well, we have a RDM policy since 2016, so we already had a data management plan template and requirements and guidance. And there was already a checklist to help NVO staff to evaluate DMPs, because DMPs have been required since 2016 for every funded project. 1 year ago, we implemented a new template according to the Science Europe core requirements. And then we saw the need to update our checklist. But we decided to not to do another checklist, but to do a rubric. And we were inspired by, as was already mentioned, the welcome rubric, and also the rubrics developed by Ghent University in Belgium. And why a rubric? I was reflecting on this in preparation for this event, and actually, it's an exercise in communication. So as you said, Geraldine, rubrics are used in education, and that's also why we went for a rubric. And it's basically, it communicates expectations of quality around the task. So as a funder, we say you as a researcher need to do a DMP, and the rubric provides clarity on what are the expectations from us as a funder and what needs to be in the DMP. And it also sets, it describes consistent criteria for evaluation. So at NVO, DMPs are evaluated by a very large number of people because they are evaluated at program level. So it basically communicates expectations also for the evaluators within NVO. But what I also, that's why I'm emphasizing the word communication, because as Welcome did, we also chose to publicize, to make the rubric public via Zenodo in open access, actually. And that also, in that way, we also communicate to researchers and to the data stewards, the colleagues that support researchers, what are the expectations. So I feel it's an exercise in communication. And so the rubric was designed for our staff primarily, but it can also be used by others for different purposes. And I've even heard here in the Netherlands, some colleagues use it for training, and some colleagues use it to explain to researchers why they have to, write all those things in their DMPs. So yeah, so I'd say it's, I really think it's a matter of also of transparency of what is expected when you when you write your DMP.
Thank you. And can you say a bit more about the sort of 2 performance level approach?
Yeah. So normally you saw the format of rubrics. They're presented in a tabular form. There's a selection, there's criteria for evaluation. Then you have quality descriptions according, for different performance levels. Often rubrics have more than one performance level. Typically in education, you've done an excellent job, you've done just a good enough job, or you failed, or you're close to passing, but you failed, or you failed completely. So there's all, and the welcome rubric had 3 levels. And we started with the welcome rubric. Actually, I think David Carr is here today. Thank you. Welcome for that example and for making it public. So we started with the welcome. And we had 3 levels. I think it was detailed. So, you did a stellar job, sufficiently addressed, you did enough, or insufficiently addressed, you kind of failed. And then the next step was we sent the rubric to colleagues in the Dutch RDM community, support community, and many of them are actually here today among the attendee list. And so we received feedback from the support community, and what we heard was that there was too much overlap between the detailed and the sufficiently addressed. There was a lot of repetition that made the rubric hard to read and to use. The detailed asks for too much, ask for more than we actually asked in the DMP. So actually the exercise of producing a rubric also makes you reflect on the DMP itself, the template, what you're asking for. So you have to be very clear on your descriptions, that you actually evaluate what you asked for, and that you, so we received that feedback that we were judging, we were asking for something we didn't ask. And also the detailed, some colleagues in the community felt that it gave the impression that, researchers would have to write lengthy descriptions, almost a dissertation, and also that's not the idea behind the DMP. And in general, limiting the number of performance levels to 2 would make it easier for reviewers when performing the review. And then we also reflected in terms of, of NVO, and, basically we said we have requirements, and it's basically we want to know, is this enough? Have you provided enough information that we are confident that you're going to meet the requirements, or you didn't provide us enough information? So then we went for 2 performance levels in collaboration with the RDM support community.
Thank you, and I think you make an important point there as well, is the that need to communicate and consult with a wider data steward community to sort of fine-tune the way that this evaluated, so that it correspond to actual practice in what I'm going to call the real world. And actual practice in the real world is something that HRB in Ireland has had plenty of practice with, and we've got Patricia here to talk to us a little bit more about that experience. I mean, you've been evaluating the first raft of DMPs whilst we were developing the rubric, and you sort of tested a draft rubric that we had for your evaluation. And I'd be interested to know a bit more about why you were so keen and went for the draft, even though it hadn't been published, but also how, a bit of feedback on how you found that experience.
Yeah, God, absolutely. I mean, we've a very similar experience to other 2 colleagues on the panel, in that we had developed our policy and brought it out so that all calls from the 1st of January 2020 at the HRB, all funding calls now have to provide a DMP template post-contract and at end of grant. Before that, we'd worked in training, mentoring and networking a cohort of data stewards within our university system, and involve them in a practical hands-on experience within 2 of our awards on a pilot basis. So these are the DMPs that we looked at with the rubric. We had already adopted the Science Europe template, DMP template, and made it available for our researchers on DMP online. And then we were looking at how to actually evaluate the DMPs that we received under this pilot. So what we had done, we convened an international panel of 6 experts in DMPs and a chair, and brought them together for a day to look at a representative sample of DMPs that were prepared under this pilot, working with the stewards, giving them experience of actually working with researchers to complete the DMP template, and then to assess what actually came out the other end. We found it to be really useful. We built on what was done elsewhere. So we were looking at what kind of rubric, or how do we actually structure the discussions as part of the panel. and found that it was a welcome guide for reviewers before they actually responded. So when they completed their assessment of the DMPs that were provided to them, but also it guided the researchers and the data stewards on how we would actually consider these as part of the panel. So it provided a real structure then on the day of the panel for the actual discussions themselves, and allowed us to sort of look at how we would provide feedback on what was happening to build into the learning process, really, with data stewards, with institutions, and internal learning for the HRB itself. As I say, we had a full day discussion, and we looked at, I suppose, a couple of things that I would sort of point out from that day and some of the key messages that had come out. I mean, the rubric itself allowed us as a funder and for our assessment to focus in on core aspects of the DMP that we wanted to assess ourselves. So more on sort of looking at maximising the reuse of the data, issues that had arisen, such as sort of looking at commercialization of data versus open and fair data, or looking at sort of what resources the institutions had actually dedicated to complete the DMP, and to look at how this would develop throughout the life cycle of the research project itself. So it also allowed us to sort of split things into issues that would be addressed more at the institutional level for the institutions, and things where we needed to provide more guidance and more specifics for researchers and data stewards to help them in preparing their DMPs. We also looked at the assessment on a number of structures, so interested in Maria's experience on using the binary assessments. So I mean, we felt that the actual discussion was structured according to a number of sort of different guides, I suppose, looking at whether the questions were actually addressed, whether they described the process, whether there was an accurate representation of what would actually be done with the data, and then just really whether it was good and whether the budget was actually sufficient or not. So it was quite a really good sort of focus for all of the discussions that happened over a complete day, and were very intensive, even though we just looked at a representative sample of 15 DMPs. I would have to say it's allowed us to actually structure the feedback after this as well. So when you talked about communication, it also has allowed us to sort of look at how we feed back the panel assessment to our principal investigators, our lead researchers, the data stewards from the relevant institutions, and also the institution level themselves. And in some cases, they were asked to sort of address the feedback and to resubmit a DMP. And some places we were given more guidance really on things that needed to be addressed better. I would say it also, we learned as a funder from using the rubric. So we know that there are areas that we need to provide better guidance on costing and budgets, for instance, and metadata uses, on licenses. But we're at the beginning of this process, I would say, and it helped us to structure where we need to prioritize our efforts.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this sort of summary of your experience using both data management plan, but also using the rubric to structure the conversation around the review of those data management plan.
Can I add one thing, Geraldine, there, just that there is a paper from the HRB that will be published which lays out this experience or whatever, and as my colleague Annalisa Montesani will be leading out on that. But it will provide more detail on the sort of approach that we've taken.
Excellent. And I'm assuming you will be a paper in open access, and that hopefully we can add a link to it potentially onto the Science Europe website in our area so that people can easily find it. So
absolutely,
that's great. Well, thank you very much to all three of you. We've reached our time. But it's been a really useful session, even for me as someone who also is looking at reviewing how we, well, not implement, because we've been using data management plan in my organisation for many years. And I hope that all your comments have also helped those listening to sort of start thinking about how they might do things in their own organisation. I think we're handing over to Marie now.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much to the four of you for these interesting insights. Before I hand over to the next speaker, I just would like to mention, I see that there's quite a lot of questions coming in. We will try to address as many as possible later in the question and answer part. I'll try to answer some already on the go in writing where possible. And for all the questions that we might not be able to respond to due to time constraints, we will all collect them and publish a document with question and answers in a few days on the Science Europe website. But now I would like to introduce the last speaker for this session, Peter Doren from DANS, from the Data Archiving and Network Services in the Netherlands. Peter is certainly not a stranger to Science Europe and certainly Science Europe's work on research data management. He was actually the chair of the data working group until early 2019 and thus very much involved in the development of the first edition of the guide. And he will show us today how he used this guide to also develop guidance for disciplinary translate the guidance into disciplinary guidance. So Peter, I think you're the best to explain it. So I'll just stop and give the floor to you.
Yeah, thank you, Marie. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you, Lydia, for showing the presentation on the screen. Indeed, I'm going to talk about how we are working with all these ideas and developments surrounding the Science Europe data management requirements in specific disciplines. And I will take one discipline as an example here, which is archaeology. So please, the next slide. So I'm talking here on behalf of a project called Ariadne Plus, but also on behalf of the institute I work for, DANS. Just a few words, what is Ariadne? It is a European project to integrate archaeological data infrastructures across Europe. It supports fair data sharing in archaeology, promotes good practices in archaeological data management. It has over 40 partners from 23 European countries, and it started in January 2019. The institute I work for is called DANS, Data Archiving and Network Services in the Netherlands, Dutch National Center of Expertise and Repository for Research Data. It has one of the largest collections of archaeological data sets in the world, over 95,000 data sets. And it's an institute of the Academy of Arts and Sciences and the Dutch Research Council, NWO. Next, please. So we're working here on data management specifically for a particular discipline and working from two sides. On the one hand, working from the Ariadne data management plan that was earlier developed and that was already in existence. You see a screenshot and a link on the left hand of the screen. And we work from what Science Europe has been doing. One of the reports that was produced by the Research Data Working Group of Science Europe was about discipline-specific research data management. And the link to that document, which is an earlier, it was even published before the first report on the harmonizing or alignment of research data management. You see the link there. Next one. So the central idea is that data management, when you require a data management plan, probably there is always a couple of things that are very specific for the project, but there is also things that are in common for a particular discipline, because a particular discipline develops certain research practices, research methodologies and standards that are particular for that domain. Like in archaeology, where you work usually with excavations or with archaeological survey data. And that clearly is different from another field. I mentioned here another example that I've been working on, like the social and behavioral sciences, where you typically work with social surveys or interview data. And these kinds of data and the methodologies to collect them, they differ obviously from discipline to discipline. But at the lowest level, there is also generic practices that hold true for all domains. When we're talking, for instance, about privacy, albeit that this is much less important in archaeology, working with data from excavations and so on, and not with personal information. Usually, there are exceptions though. It's of course quite different from for instance, the social sciences or the medical sciences. The estimate is that about 80% of the issues raised in a data management plan are actually discipline independent, and 20% is dependent on the particular project. The advantages of working with a domain protocol, which is a kind of a standard document describing the standard practices that hold true for any project, would be that if you have that, it would be much faster and much easier to make a data management plan for your particular project. And as a protocol is based on good practices of a certain scientific field, it will also have a normative and an educational function for those researchers who are less, let us say, a specialist in data management practices. For funders, there's also a big advantage because it's much easier and quicker to evaluate a data management plan if a lot of it is actually the same for a whole field and you can just tick that off in one go. And what we did in this particular work is to link the protocol that we developed directly to the Harmonized Science Europe requirements and to to provide model answers that are directly derived from the evaluation rubric, wherever that is possible, because sometimes the level of specialization that this requires goes beyond what you can formulate in a standard way. And therefore, the $1,000,000 question actually is how much detail is required, both in a protocol and in a data management plan. How far do you want to go? How much detail do you really need to be able to evaluate whether it is good enough or not good enough? Let's go to the next one. Here is a graph that depicts the situation. We have harmonized research data management requirements from Science Europe. We now have, since today, the evaluation rubric. The domain protocol would answer the majority of the questions from the harmonized data management requirements and could be automatically evaluated by the rubric, and only perhaps, this is an approximation, 20% remains that needs to be specified in the data management plan where further details are required. I think we can go on to the next slide. Well, the first attempt to formulate such a domain data protocol was in the social sciences, social and behavioral sciences. And I summarized that here. I presented the first draft on the European Survey Research Association conference in July 2019 in Zagreb. The idea was really received a very positive welcome, but there was a but. It was found to be too detailed. Many of these standard answers still had all kinds of options concerning non-compliance. If you do not comply with a certain protocol article, then you would have to explain. And the details that needed to be given sometimes were all solved within the same protocol form. And that proved to be too cumbersome. Because in that way, the protocol became similar to a very extensive DMP template. So we started to simplify that for the archaeological case. Next slide. So the second attempt is now being made or has been made in the context of the Ariadne Plus project, which had already worked on a DMP template for archaeology, as I said. And the protocol that we have now is a simplified and adapted version of the social science one. And a couple of things happened. You will be able to look at it for yourself because I will provide a link to the final draft, because at that stage it is now. So you can take a look at it if you want. But many options, they moved simply to guidance. Non-compliance and details are to be specified in the Ariadne data management plan. And also it appeared, but you only notice that when you do it in practice, that actually a substantial number of articles in the protocols for the social sciences and archaeology are still very similar. There is more similarity between those still rather different scientific fields than at least I originally anticipated. The protocol as it is now has still about 50 articles, which I still find quite a lot. However, note that this number is about comparable to the number of bullets in the Science Europe guidance and evaluation rubric, separately, not taken together, that is. And also that whole handbooks are devoted to subjects such as data privacy in data, or quality management, or data security, or research ethics, etc. All topics in the Science Europe data management requirements. And that have been brought back to the essence in just a few protocol articles each. And then you quickly arrive at these 50. Next. Just one example. The first Science Europe research data management requirement asks, how will new data be collected or produced, and or how will existing data be reused? And then we already had that guidance in the second column, you see that. And in the third column, that is what we have now new. When this is sufficiently addressed in a data management plan according to the evaluation rubric. And you see here those bullets. Next slide, please. So here is the corresponding articles from the protocol. The numbering is the same. You see there 1A, and there is actually here 5 articles to deal with all the bullets of the Science Europe guidance and or evaluation rubric. But it specifies it rather generically. For instance, the first one, and I will not go to the other ones. The research team has checked whether previous data on the subject of the research exist and that can be reused. If this is the case, such data will be reused, respecting licenses and applicable constraints, including intellectual property rights. All these things have been derived from the Science Europe guidance and rubric. You could simply say, yes, I do that, and you don't have to do anything else, and you will have already, let us say, satisfied some conditions. But of course, if you do not comply, then you would have to explain. Or, and here we are at the level of detail that you want, if you want, you could specify pre-existing data that will be reused. It's not up to me to decide whether that is necessary or not. That is something that, let us say, probably the funder or the one that is responsible for the project would decide. And that are the things that can be specified in the data management plan. And further you see reference to where it is in the Ariadne data management plan. And if guidance is needed, it is also given in a separate column. Next one. And that is also the final final slide. I have conclusions and next steps. Conclusions are that I would say, well, perhaps first I would say that such a disciplinary approach really makes sense. Although that many protocol articles appear to be discipline independent even, so are probably valid for many disciplines. Guidance is usually more domain specific, especially with respect to things like standards and norms or codes of conduct, importance of privacy and ethics related to personal information for a particular field, like I said in the beginning, archaeology not working much with personal data at all, social sciences a lot, or medical sciences. The next, the importance of specific data types and formats, the role of things such as sampling in research, which may have a big influence, and the existence of the domain repositories and their demands. Then a third conclusion is that it is much easier to comply with the protocol and much less work on a data management plan is needed when two conditions are satisfied. One, is that during the research, if institutional research data management policies and support are in place, if universities, for instance, have taken care of things like data security and backup systems and so on, it's much less worry for the individual researcher. And secondly, after the research, if data is shared via a certified trusted digital repository, again, a lot of topics from a data management plan are already automatically covered and will take much less time to formulate for your individual project. Next steps is the last slide. So where are we now and what still remains to be done? Well, I sincerely hope that funding organization will go on implementing Science Europe's research data management requirements and the evaluation rubric. An important question I have is in how far Horizon Europe is going to follow the Science Europe requirements. What is now in progress is to accept and implement the domain protocol by the Ariadne partners. I said already it is, what was it, 45 or something like this, and the wider archaeological community. Then we would very much like to consult with you, Science Europe, and other funding organizations, whether you endorse the domain protocol and the connected template for this particular field, because that will make it life so much easier for all archaeologists and also for you funders. And finally, protocols, I think, should be formulated for many more fields. But if the first one is in operation, it will be fairly straightforward and quick to implement them in other fields as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this very interesting presentation. I'm really glad to see that the guidance is also taking forward on the disciplinary level. We have a few minutes left for questions. I've seen quite a lot of questions. I would like to take those first that are really directly directed at some of the panelists. And as I said, we'll do our best to answer all the other questions in writing or during this session in the question and answer part. One question I got, I guess, Geraldine, you might be the most suitable for me to ask. I'm not sure you have an answer already ready for this, but there was a question that with the Brexit, whether there will be a UK template for data management plans or whether there is some alignment already with the Science Europe core requirements.
I'd like to think that data management plans can go beyond borders and restrictions in terms of political setup. And although I'm not aware that any of the funders currently, certainly within UKRI, the councils, many councils have got data management plans that they use. I don't think that any of us have, they were implemented before the Science Europe guides came out. So I don't think any of us have yet put the work into reviewing them and seeing how they might need to be identified and aligned. Now, I don't think the Brexit sort of scenario is going to have an influence there, because in terms of collaborations, we're very keen to make sure that it's still simplified, and we will still be part of science and of the Horizon Europe program. So even at European level, it makes sense for us to be aligned. And I think we're aligned with the principles, even if in the layout it might not automatically be identical. So watch this space. That's on the long list of to-do things to review in the next few months and years.
Okay, thank you very much. I have another question, quite concrete for you, Patricia, if I may. The question was on what you would think, how accurate were the costings for data management and the DMPs that you did already review?
Definitely need more guidance on budget costings. I mean, we provided details and asked our researchers at application stage to provide details on justify costs for data management, and then they got to review that once it was contract negotiation stage, once they were successful. It was very varied across institutions and within institutions, where some institutions had a block data management cost and others it costed for individual levels, but it's definitely something that we're looking at in great detail. And we'll look at providing a lot more guidance on what would be expected costs for different areas.
Okay, thank you very much. And then one last question to all panelists, so feel free to pick this up if you have an idea. There was a question, what else is needed for to ensure reusability except for fair data? And one of the suggestions made was looking more into software. What else would you think is still needed to look at in the future?
Maybe I can say something about software. Actually, in our implementation of the Science Europe template, we changed one of the questions to put more emphasis on it in software, and it's one of the areas we're interested to look in more detail. So it's possible. What I'm saying, it's possible already to modify the template to put more emphasis to software.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from the other panelists? Is there anything else than software? Because software is something we hear quite often, and as Maria said, this can be integrated already. What else is needed to ensure reusability of data?
Well, if I may add something, I think, and it's linked to software, but slightly twisting the question, in a sense that I think what's needed possibly more is the tools to capture the data as the research project is being carried out in such a way that the data is already kind of structured in a way that will make it easier then to deposit, to share, or to make it fair. And I think in some disciplines, those tools might be more common than in others. And with a lack of that, kind of collecting the data as you do your project with in mind that you will share it as well, and, you know, put the right metadata around it, etc. It's often a huge burden for a research team to then clean the data or prepare the data in order to be deposited. And I think there's more to be done upstream, which is not really related to DMP, but to have the right tools at that stage and the right software, etc., so that it's collected in a way that at the end you almost just click on a button and it's being pushed into a repository. That's maybe aspirational.
Okay, thank you very much. But I think this is a very nice vision for the future to allow me to end this session here. We will have a 5-minute break and we'll then start the last session. So I would all invite you to be back at 5 to 3:30. Thank you very much.
I think it's time to go ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this event, to this important event on the launch of the Research Data Management Guide for the international alignment. I would like to welcome you particularly to this session, to this roundtable on the importance of alignment of research data management in the broader open science context. We have very nice list of speakers and panelists. This session will have 3 parts. One is 2 invited guests, very relevant, you will see now. They are going to give us their perspectives on the EU initiatives. Then we will have a dialogue with we will have back Thierry Damerval and Mark Childs. And together with Kostas Glinos and Karol Leuven, we will have a series of final reflections on how to move from here. So I would like to first say that Science Europe has not only been engaged with its members to develop these guidelines, to its members and other organizations, as you have learned, but also is very engaged in
developments at EU level. And in particular, very relevant to this launch is the development of the European Open Science Cloud, which many of you, I'm sure, have heard of. And I also know that in the audience, there are many people engaged in this development. I think that the European Open Science Cloud, which started as a very vague idea, if I remember correctly, Costas, it was 2016, 2017, has now skyrocketed, especially during the last year and a half, to an entity that is progressing very well, that has a set of very clear objectives, and that has led to this support by the European Commission by providing the platform to generate a European partnership. Kostas Glinos from the European Commission has been an incredible partner all along this process, always very supportive and very helpful. And Professor Karel Leuven has also been the academic part, the visible academic part of this endeavor. I will give the word first to Kostas, please, to give us your perspective on the research data from the European Commission, and then we will move to listening to Karel. So Kostas, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Lydia, for your good words. Let me share my screen. Okay, thank you for your good words. A lot has been said from the beginning of the meeting, so I'm not sure I can add much. I mean, Karel will talk about EOSC after me, so I'm not going to say anything about EOSC. But also at the beginning, Thierry Merval explained very well why we need DMPs and how important alignment across Europe and across the world is. So I think I'll skip also the open science general definition and how that fits with open science. I think this audience is very familiar. And I will talk mostly about Horizon Europe and a few other remarks. So we started with in FP7, as you know, with an open access pilot, nothing to do with data. Then we had the data pilot in 2014. This became the default data management plans, and open research data became the default in 2017. And now in the new framework program, Horizon Europe, we want to mainstream all aspects of open science across the program. So this means within the grant agreement, the model grant agreement, this means within the annotated grant agreement, within evaluation criteria, within the templates for proposals, within project reviews, within the guidelines for project officers and the guidelines for the beneficiaries and so on and so forth. So across the whole domain. And of course, part of this is the research data management that we have been discussing about. So what do we do exactly about research data management in Horizon Europe? None of this will be any surprise to anybody, but so our governing principle is to be in line with FAIR, all data sets to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and for data to be as open as possible and as close as necessary in the projects. At proposal stage, we will evaluate proposals on preliminary research data management considerations. I'll come back to this later. All projects that do relate to data that have to generate or collect or reuse data will have to establish and regularly update a data management plan. So as everybody said before, it will be a living document. Actually, when we say data management plan, we could have named it a results management plan or an output management plan, because also we strongly recommend that within, apart from data sets, also software, models, algorithms, any other digital outputs of a project are also included in the data management plan. Beneficiaries will have to deposit the data they produce in a repository and to link their data to publications that this data underpin, if applicable. Again, for repositories, they have to be valid. They have to provide PIDs. They have to ensure rich metadata. And this is, again, consistent what is in the Science Europe guidelines. We also have, for some actions, we may, in the future, have an additional obligation, who have the legal ability to do this, to deposit in particular repositories that are federated under the European Open Science Cloud. Beneficiaries have also to ensure the open access where this is provided. There will be exceptions as soon as possible. As soon as possible means before the end of the project, basically, under CC BY or CC 0 licenses or equivalent. Again, unless you have exceptions that need to be properly justified into the data management plan. Again, when I say data here, I mean also software and other digital objects. And this is what this slide concerns, that we actually want to ensure proper management and, where possible, open access to all research outputs. And actually, in many cases, physical outputs also, like reagents, antibodies, or whatever hardware. They will need also to be properly managed, and where it makes sense, where appropriate, to provide access to them. Now, FAIR has made quite some progress in the past. It's now within the research domain relatively well understood. It's not so much the case outside the research domain. It would make a lot of sense, FAIR, for example, in public data, but the concept is not well established. We are taking initiatives with our colleagues in the Commission in other areas that are not research to lend them the concept as well. But within research, where is there still work to be made is what we're saying on this slide, stumbling block. It is in metrics or mechanisms to assess requirements, and to allow researchers to judge whether their data are sufficiently fair regarding the F, the I, the A, or the R. And similarly, not only for researchers, but also for those that evaluate research, review proposals or projects. So I'm not going to talk about these initiatives now, but we'll have in detail, but we'll have a number of initiatives that are filling this gap. There is a working group in the Research Data Alliance, RDA, on the FAIR data maturity model. There is the Fairware initiative, and there are a couple of tools being produced by the FAIR is FAIR project. I put 3 slides into the presentation because it will be distributed afterwards, but I'm not going to go through them now. For example, the Fuji tool is an automated assessment tool to judge whether data are fair, and for building awareness within organizations and researchers, we have FairAware as another example. I would like to congratulate also, I didn't say it, I think, in the beginning, Science Europe. That has been a great initiative. It was great in 2019 because this was something really needed, and the guidelines in 2018 were incorporated into the annotated model grant agreements at that time. Similar references will be made in Horizon Europe. In Horizon Europe, we're not there yet. We are finishing, we're putting the last final touches now onto the model grant agreement. We are maybe 1 month away or 2 months away from for the annotated grant agreement. And then we'll have still work to do with, as I said at the beginning, with producing the guidelines, including for project reviews. And for project reviews, some of what was said in the meeting today, including, for example, by Patricia Clark or by the DMP evaluation rubric within the new guidelines, will be very useful to us. I have a question mark about evaluation at proposal stage, because at the proposal stage, so far we are saying that we don't need a fully expanded data management plan. We need only some elements, and this is because we have a success rate of, let's say, 20% on average, or below that in many areas. We don't want to have proposals that will eventually be as successful to devote all the time needed to develop a fully fledged management plan. On the other hand, we do want to evaluate some basic aspects, and we're not sure yet what these aspects will be. probably it will be the openness or closed, whether data will be open or closed, and also to have the proposers think about it and have an understanding of what data do they need to collect or reuse. One word about COVID-19 and fair data, because this was mentioned by Mark Shields at the beginning. You know that we have made a pilot under EOSC, and also it's a pilot for the future health cloud, responding very quickly to the emergency of the pandemic for COVID-19 data. And on the 20th of April, we launched together with our partners in EMBL and in Elixir and other partners, a European COVID-19 data platform that I think exemplifies very well the concept of fair data and of fair data sharing and the reuse. The data has been very successful in a very short time, just in a few months. I think there are users already from something like 160 or 170 countries around the world, and they have something like 10 million downloads already. So in summary, how do we move forward? So we consider RDM, research data management, an essential component of open science policies. As a funder, we'll walk the talk, and we put stringent requirements on future Horizon Europe projects that will be more expanded than what we had in Horizon 2020. We'll put emphasis on responsible data management in line with the FAIR principles. We are working in parallel on tools that, or we are funding others to work on tools that will fill the gaps on the metrics and assessment of fair data sets. And all this in the understanding that fairness is a journey. So we're not going to have completely fair data, of course, by decree or within 1 or 2 years. This is a journey, but it's a journey really worth taking. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Kostas, for this very interesting overview. In Science Europe, we are very pleased on the open science policies that the Commission is planning to implement in Horizon Europe. And we are also very pleased that you plan to continue to reference the RDM guide as a good practice. It's really very good. That is our objective, that many researchers become aware of it and use it. Researchers, data management stewards, anybody engaged in this data cycle. I would like to give the word to Karel Leuven, the architect, or one of the architects, one of the main architects of the EOSC Association and the EOSC partnership as well. Karel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lydia. I will start by sharing my screen. I've been asked to say something about the European Open Science Cloud, and before I do so, I would like to first congratulate you with the guide you've brought out as Science Europe. I remember the time when Stan Gille volunteered to take this on and to talk to all the funders and to get this going. And it's beautiful to see that this is sort of the second edition and that you are moving on forwards from that. In contrast to what Kostas did, want to make a definition of open science. And I see this as the movement of the science as we did it or are doing to a certain extent still, and the science we would like to do. And in between, there are three main developments as we see it in the Netherlands towards more open access. A more important one, and therefore there's a thicker arrow here, towards fair data, and that's what it is about today, of course, and towards more citizen science, the involvement of citizens in asking the questions, evaluating the answers, but also sometimes in doing the science itself. These three developments is what we call the development of open science, and these need a number of boundary conditions, and these boundary conditions are sort of emphasized under the part where there is towards fair data, because there is the most need of help. Help in the form of skills, data stewards, help in the form of another rewards and recognition system, where also this part, and not only the publications are much more, let's say, part of the recognition and reward system, which a lot of work is going on in Europe, as you may know. And of course, we need certain metrics also with the data side and not only the publication side in order to evaluate where we're going. Not evaluate individuals. I'm not talking about metrics for individuals. I'm talking about metrics for whole organizations or for countries. And this total set is what we call the transition. And that transition is where I use the word open science. Ultimately, 20 years from now, the word open can disappear and it's just called science again, I would say. By the way, a remark in between. No, I can better make it after this slide. Also important is to define the difference between open data and fair data. Still mixed up by quite a number of people now and then. Open data for me is data that are open, freely available. You can reuse if you want to. Doesn't say anything about how fair these data are. And as you know, fair stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. This is a set of principles and underlying principles, and it's not a set of standards. And of course, if we do research with publicly funded resources, then we would like to have these two overlap as much as possible. So we are moving towards as fair as possible and as open as possible. These two developments are essential. And that brings me to what I wanted to say a minute ago, the word fairness, which also appears in your guide. I'm not very fond of the word fairness because also it leads to the word unfair, which is not a good word in relation to the fair. So I would say as fair as possible, an evaluation of the level of principles of fair. But okay, I understand you use the word. I emphasize again, as Kostas did, the fact that we are talking about digital objects. So all digital objects, all data, all software, and all, let's say, digital objects that come from the research. And yes, for some, this is further developed for the, let's say, classical data than for others, especially the software part. But ultimately, the aim is to do this as well for the classical data, the software, the publications, and all other digital objects coming from research. We need identifiers for that, as you all know. We need more standards and codes for that. And last but not least, and which is important also in your guide, the metadata. This development has been mentioned in a presentation by Ursula von der Leyen, Web of Scientific Insight, and we tend to refer to it as the web of fair data and related services, also ultimately running on the internet, of course, but a web of fair data and related services in which we federate the relevant existing and future services, not new data storage, not new data compute power, and not new data connection are going to be made by EOSC. These are essential, as I will come back to in a minute, but this is not the task of EOSC. So it will be a virtual space like the World Wide Web for pages, where science producers and science consumers come together, ultimately in an open-ended range, not only for Europe, but maybe with the quality mark made in Europe, data made in Europe, especially as we develop this here. You could also say data infrastructures compared to the e-infrastructures are a twin sister or twin brother of each other. So the European e-infrastructures can be seen as a twin sister or twin brother of the data infrastructures. The last ones, the e-infrastructures offering the store, compute, and connect services, essential, as I said, and the EOSC and the data services, data infrastructure offering the services for the data, the help with the data, and the interoperability as one of the main targets for sharing data and reusing data. E-infrastructures without any data in it don't mean anything. Data without e-infrastructures do not mean anything either. You cannot do anything with it. So these two are in a yin-yang position. They are both essential. We have, over time with the executive board, and Lydia, you were part of that, developed what we call objectives tree for the EOSC ecosystem. I'm not going to explain this in detail. You can find it in my slides, and you can find it later on in the SRIA, which is being published shortly. One development with respect to the people, how much is open science the norm? one development with respect to the data. This is what we're talking about today, the FAIR data, research data management plan, and one development with respect to the infrastructures. And we have analyzed what are the problems, the barriers, what are our objectives, federated infrastructures, and what are the possible benefits from reaching these objectives. EOSC, and I think it's essential to say, has at its core researchers or research. Of course, this is not to let's say make researchers as individuals better, but this is to make research better and to help research. Therefore, I use the word research rather than researcher. But of course, it is the researcher that produces research, so these two go hand in hand. The overarching principle I would like to stipulate very clearly is that the development of EOSC is research-centered, the whole initiative. But there's a number of other guiding principles. Multi-stakeholderism, it will only work if the research performing organizations, research funding organizations, and service providing organizations closely work together, and therefore we invite them all as part of the EOSC association. Of course, as open as possible, as close as necessary, has been said several times, and this is also a guiding principle for EOSC. And the FAIR principles have been mentioned clearly and are also clearly mentioned in your research data management guide, are also underlying and guiding principles for EOSC. And last, no, not last, the Federation of Infrastructures, I already mentioned it, but last but not least, is the machine actionability, also a guiding principles. EOSC will strive to find the right balance between machines and people in delivering the services that we need. Ultimately, in the case of these large data sets, which we see in many of the sciences, not always and not everywhere, it's only machines that can handle those. So essential is also the machine actionability, which is part of the FAIR principles, as we all know. So what are the actions for the near future to develop and govern this a federating core? I will not explain that in this presentation. You can find it in other presentations. The association will see to it that the compliance framework is managed or manage it themselves as the trusted certification, as is the AAI, the authorization authentication infrastructure that is needed for that, PID policies. It will outreach to stakeholders. We are doing that constantly, and this is one other opportunity for that. Monitoring its services and transactions, manage the EOSC trademark, and of course, contribute to the Horizon Europe policy, where, as you already mentioned it, Lydia, we are aiming for a partnership to be formed between the European Union, signed by the European Commission, and the EOSC association, representing all those stakeholders which are members of the association. So my question or suggestion to you is, let's create EOSC together. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Karel, for this excellent and very comprehensive presentation from the very basics from open science to the implementation in the current European Open Science Cloud. This has been very helpful for both of you, Kostas and Karel. I would like to invite now Thierry and Mark Shields also to join this last panel. We have about half an hour of dialogue, and we can engage in, I hope, fruitful dialogue with the audience. I invite the attendees to submit questions or main comments through the question and answer box, preferably. But before opening the floor for questions, maybe I would like to give the opportunity back to Mark and Thierry, in case you have any initial reflections after hearing all the good practices we have heard from Science Europe members, FWF, UKRI, NWO, and HRB, of course, and see if you have any sort of reflection on their practices or what you have heard from Kostas and Karel.
Mark, you want to start?
Well, yes, thank you. Maybe very briefly, I think if we started off, and I think it's good to be recalled under the leadership of NWO and Stan Gielen in particular. We started off with the with the ambition to align. So because what we were seeing before is that some some funders already were implementing requirements for data management plans. Some of these were very extended, were requiring very many details, very large papers needed to be, or forms need to be filled out. It was very badly received by the researchers. Others did it differently. And I think one of the other priorities of Science Europe is international collaboration, and we strongly support and have developed collaborative models between funding agencies, and that can only work if there is a minimum of alignment. So I'm very glad to see the degree of adoption that this common research data management guiding principles have created. So if and Thierry sits next to, or at least virtually sits next to me, we have a long-standing collaboration agreement between our two funding agencies. So if researchers submit something with the lead agency principal, if they submit something to the ANR, well, they know that what they will submit there will not be too different of what we do require on our side. So I think it's a help for researchers as well, and therefore I think it has by and large achieved its goal. And if it's if similar guidance is provided or referenced within the Horizon Europe framework program, I think that at least that goal we will have achieved, to have this alignment and have a common set of principles, which is important.
Yes,
thank you, Mark. Thierry?
Thank you, Mark. I completely agree with you. Just so a short comment, I will not repeat what you have said, but just I think on one of the slide of Carol, one of the statement was it was the slide where you had several boxes with a statement, and one of the statements was the fact that national infrastructure do not share open science standards and practice. So I think again that the collaboration with EOSC within Science Europe, between funding agency, between research performing organization is essential. Again, the way the research results are shared is a key societal topics. And as a funding agency, I think through the policies and guidelines implemented in our call for proposals and the activities, we really have to contribute to a common research community roadmap and completely aligned and supporting EOSC vision, mission, and actions that Carol just presented.
Thank you, Thierry. I have a question, actually it's for you, but others, Carol or Kostas or Mark, you can also reply. It is, in fact, a question that comes from the first session, where it refers to what other research systems are doing in terms of research data management. USA, China, Russia, are there any, do we know what these systems are doing? And is there any possibility to engage in some type of dialogue?
Well, honestly, but maybe Kostas knows that. I don't know exactly what happened in China and Russia at this time. I just know that through the partnership we can have with several different agencies, of course, with the US, I just recall that NSF started to ask for DMP, I think in 2011, and then OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, asked all funding agencies in the US to ask for DMP, and I think it was in 2013 or something like that. I know that with Japan, because we have a common call with GST and so on, and they are aligned on the same policy and several other Asian countries. But sorry, about China and Russia, I don't know exactly. Maybe Kostas, you know more.
Yes, there are a few things going on. so many that we cannot follow them all as much as we would like. In China, I don't think there is much to talk about because it is a very heterogeneous landscape. So each university does its own thing, and the one that we usually have interaction with is the Chinese Academy of Science, which already, of course, as big as a European country in terms of production of data, but most of it is not accessible to us. So maybe they are fair, maybe they do a lot, they have their own cloud and so on, but most of the data are closed, therefore, okay, it's of not much interest. There is in the US, I think they're in a very similar course with us. And we have been engaging with the NIH and the National Science Foundation, including through G7, in which some of the European countries, as you know, participate. G7 has an open science working group that addresses also issues of data. And now the presidency of the G7 passed from the United States, where under Trump administration, it was a little bit, let's say, depressed, to the UK, who are leading in many aspects of open science, and they want to keep the open science working group, and will have an ambitious agenda for this year that will be discussed in a meeting later on this month in February with the UK. So some things can be done there. But maybe the most mature effort is by the OECD, that has been working out data guidelines, research data guidelines, and has produced a draft report with our collaboration, the collaboration of many other countries in the OECD. I'm not sure if it's out already formally or not, but it's very close to being published. In the context of G7, we have also, of course, relations with Japan. Actually, the Open Science Working Group of G7, we co-chair with Japan. I mean, the EU and Japan are the co-chairs, till now at least. So yes, there are many channels through which, in other words, to do this.
Thank you, Kostas. And we shall link, I think, to those important initiatives, those important international initiatives. Karel, you want to come in?
Yeah, we have started informal discussions with China, the Chinese Academy of Science, and they have a development called Open Science Cloud. They even have a development started called Global Open Science Cloud. So they want to work in this direction of global. The person we're talking to heading this initiative has gotten some money, €1 million from the Chinese ministry or organizations to get this discussion going. NIST is representing the United States there. We have discussions with Canada and Australia. And this is with the help of GoFair, CoData, WDS, and RDA. So these four organizations have joined forces for data for whatever it's called. With those, we have started informal discussions and said that we will continue these in order to see the developments of EOSC in Europe, to see the developments made by the Chinese Academy of Sciences, to see the developments in the United States. By the way, they are not so optimistic there, but this was still at the time of Trump, I must say, so they may be more optimistic now, Kostas. As I say, it's informal for the time being, but the lines are open.
Great, thank you, Karel, also for this clarification, very important. I suggest we turn our attention to those producing the data, that means the researchers. And I think we are all more or less aware of the extent that there is reluctance in big parts of the scientific community by the scientists to share or to produce the research data management plans. They are often perceived as a burdensome tasks. They do not necessarily see the long-term effects, worried as they are naturally with their own projects and the quality of the science. So what would be your reflections to show the researchers the added value of investing in the data management plans, and how we can best support them, how the institutions could best support them so that they don't bear the burden of defining the data management plans with that level of technicality that we are seeking for the good preservation and sharing of the data.
Well, if I may start, Lydia, I already mentioned in my presentation that skills with respect to data are an essential development. And as you know, we are working in several countries on educating data stewards. A lot of organizations have already hired data stewards. There's an organization formed an implementation network of data stewards between Germany and the Netherlands at the moment, which form an within GoFair. And I think the best way to help our researchers is to provide them with the support they need, be it at the level at the bench, depending on what type of research they're doing, at the level of let's say the school or faculty, or at the level of the university or research performing organization itself, and bring that together in the country with the different disciplines, because a lot of it is, let's say, at least domain specific, but many cases even discipline specific. And so therefore these data stewards can be people that, if they are working at the bench, have been educated with a bachelor in their discipline and knowledge on data and data management on top of that, with a special line of education. We simply have to get used to the fact that if we spend our money on data properly, we will save money. If we ask from all our PhD students and postdocs to do that all themselves, to invent everything themselves, it will take way more time and will then take their attention away from the real research. It is not seen everywhere, but I think we should keep on stressing this. So let's say sometimes we mention an average number of 5% of the research funding should be invested in some sort of form in the data management, be it the material, the infrastructure for that, be it the help of data stewards, or be it whatever. And that's still, I think, a very reasonable number if you compare to what is going into it now already. And we tend to forget what we invested already in infrastructures of this kind. So yeah, researchers should be helped.
Thank you, Karel. I think these two are very important initiatives, the data stewards and the investment in data as a proportion of the project. Thierry, you would like to comment?
Yes, if I can add a few words. First, we really have to explain what is a DMP. And the guide is very useful for that. And to have a common language on what is a DMP. So that's the first point, and that's the reason why I think the guide is very important. The second point, yes, I completely agree with Karel. We have to accompany this change to give services, to provide infrastructure, and really to help researchers. The third point is the fact that we also have to explain that data management can no longer be seen as an additional work, but is really an integral part of research work. And for that, the best thing is to give example. I will take an example. I'm quite convinced that if we ask, at least in France, to scientists in archaeology a few years, even a few months ago, do you need a DMP? What is a DMP? Do you want to use a DMP? I'm not sure the answer would be yes. And the presentation of Peter show exactly that in every kind of the research, and that's the reason I take the example of archaeology, we need DMP. DMP is useful and is part of the research process.
If I may add to these two interventions, to which I fully agree. Yes, absolutely. It's absolutely necessary. It's not just a may have or nice to have, it's a must have. I also agree about the data stewards and the investments universities need to make. I would go further and say that universities or all RPOs should really take ownership of their scientific production. We cannot have the situation of today continue where a lot of the scientific production is just either lost or surrendered to some private service provider that we don't know what will happen and how we can find it in 5 or 10 years. or even worse, that copyright is assigned to somebody else, like a publisher, and then the public purse has funded this research, but then the copyright belongs to somebody else. So research institutions need to take ownership, and this is DMPs are one way, one of the important ways to do this, and this has many other dimensions. Also, I would like to mention that you know, I mean, there has been a lot of noise about it, about the 750 billion euros for the recovery and facility that will be spent around European countries, and all countries are asked to provide to the Commission national plans on how they intend to spend this money. In one of the guidelines, EOSC is mentioned as an example. And we had, when we put this as an example, specifically we had in mind, we had discussed this also in the governing board, Karel, as you may remember, of EOSC. We had in mind precisely investments like the ones Karel says. So universities asking the government to put money down for them to upgrade their repositories, to hire data stewards, to do all these structural reforms that are necessary for a university to become digital really to be the 21st century university. And this is a big opportunity because there's a lot of money and member states, countries are asking how to spend it. So for all those that are listening as well, it is I think everybody's responsibility to make sure that that universities can take ownership of their scientific production, and they are equipped both in terms of human staff or personnel, as well in terms of infrastructure, as they should.
Thank you, Kostas, for this clarification. And in the meantime, we received a note from Eva Mendes, the former chair of the Open Science Policy Platform, who sees a thumbs up to what you said about institutions taking responsibility for their data production. Karel, please.
If I may, I would like to add to that, and I fully agree with Kostas. This might be an interesting source of money to stimulate this. Ultimately, these research performing organizations have to pay this themselves. The fact that we have and generate data and how to work with them properly doesn't mean that there is extra money coming for science. There is a certain amount of money for science, and with that we have to do our work. But in the transition, this will be hard for research performing organization. So it's especially this transition that could be financed with this and other funds that needs to be helped. To many of my colleagues, Rector Magnifici in the Netherlands, I usually tend to say, instead of hiring the 21st PhD student, hire a data steward and then continue with the next 20 PhD students, and not only PhD students. That is not an efficient way of spending your money.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all for your contributions. There was a follow-up question about the incentives for researchers in the AMPs, which is addressed to all of you, about your opinion concerning the publication of data management plans at the end of the project when there is sensitive information in it. So do you have an opinion on the publication of the MPs?
I'm not sure whether I understand your question. What do you mean by sensitive material? I mean, if you say as open as possible, as closed as necessary, then the things that are sensitive are closed and the things that can be open are open, hopefully as much as possible, especially if it's publicly funded. But I do not understand the question.
I think this question was asked by Lionel Perini, which it is from the Swiss Science Foundation. So probably it was looking for a clarification in this sense. I don't know. I think there is a question for Mark from Reme Melero. It says, why doesn't Plan S does not include a research and data sharing principle?
Yes, now I understand why it's for me.
It was to be expected, such a question.
Yes, I suppose that. Well, the reason is very simple. With Plan S, we actually wanted to attack and solve one very specific problem. which is the one about open access to publications. Now, this is by far not the only important aspect in the whole field of open science, such as Karel has nicely shown in its entirety, which is one specific issue, maybe not even the most important one. But we came to the conclusion that it's sufficiently complex to just address that problem, so that we didn't want to have too much within packed into Plan S, because it probably not have solved any of the problems. If you're trying to solve too many problems at a time, then you're probably not going to solve any one. So we focus particularly on open access to publication, knowing that this is not the only problem and probably not the most important problem in this whole issue of open science. So that was the reason.
Lydia,
Yes,
may I make a
please,
suggestion for the next step? I fully agree with Mark, open access, fair data, etc. If you think about fair data, a lot of times I've been asked the question, what data do you mean? I've been a researcher myself, not active anymore, but been active for many years, and I know what I mean if I talk about data. But I can tell you that of the 35 PhD students I supervised over the years, not 2% of their data are in their publications. So a lot of data in the engineering sciences in this particular case are underlying data, sometimes not even needed for the publications. So the first step could be that we ask from every researcher at least to put the data that are in his or her publication in a repository that is trusted and make them as fair as possible. After we've done that, all the researchers know what is a trusted repository. All the researchers know what is fair. Then the next step could be, after, let's say, a year or so, that we also, or a couple of years, to also ask them to produce the underlying data in order to reproduce that publication in a repository and make them as fair as possible. And I think these two are the minimum requirements we can ultimately demand if the research is publicly funded. Yes, the side effects and the side results are very welcome, but not all of that. So researchers are really struggling. Do I have to put my data out there tomorrow if I did my measurement today? No, that's not the case. So we have to become clearer what we mean by data.
Thank you, Karel. Does any of you want to say one more thing? Yes, please, Mark.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree with that, and we're actually not so far away from that, because most funders, I mean, independently from Plan S, most funders now, and I think it will be the case in the European, in Horizon Europe as well, that there has to be a data availability statement in the publication. That's actually something which publishers require as well. So on this point, we can work together, or at least we have a common goal and objective with publishers, that there has to be a data accessibility or availability statement in each paper. And then many funders now will also require that the data which underpin the conclusions or the work that is published, that these data should be made available according to the FAIR principles. So I think we're already partly on that, have partly progressed on that way. And I think you're absolutely right, Karel, that it gives a sensitivity to researchers about what does that mean? Huh? What is a repository and why is it useful? Just as it's an anecdote, but it's a true one. Last year, I got a request from other scientists which were reading one of my papers, which I published 13 years ago, and they asked me, "So can we have the data which underpins the paper, because we've developed an interesting method which would like to test." And the data was collected 16 years ago. I can tell you, I asked with my former university, do we still have that data somewhere? nothing. So we see what is lost. Well, of course, I'm very flattered that people are still reading my papers after 13 years, but unfortunately couldn't help them, because at that time, no one, I mean, the word data management didn't even exist. So it's all lost. It's an asset for universities, for research institutions. Data is an asset which needs investment. It's not a money producing asset, but it's an intellectual asset. And with the huge quantities of data that are being produced these days, it's probably one of the more important intellectual assets which university and research institutes are producing, and we should take care of that. They should take care of that. We should help them, and we should provide the support.
And thank you, Mark, for that. And bringing that to the research data into the broader context of open science, perhaps I would launch a question for Kostas. If we look at the bigger picture from where we are today, what and with all the I think the very good policies regarding open science that the European Commission is setting, how do you think this can influence the take-up of open science practices by those who are not yet convinced? We know there is a lot out there that still are not really adopting open science for several reasons, mostly related sometimes to quality assurance aspects, I would say. There are other inputs, but this is one that resonates a lot to the mind of researchers. So how do you think these policies that you are about to implement, strengthened, because there's been policies in the past, can encourage others to take?
Yeah, thanks, Lydia. I think we have been making a lot of progress over the last 10 years, and the progress, I see it accelerating. And therefore, I mean, I think virtually all European ministries are convinced, regardless of whether some of them, they take it seriously and do lots of things about it, or some others don't do so much about it yet. But I think all of them are convinced on how sound the open science policies are, and that they are really needed to increase the quality and efficiency of research. So I think we're making very good progress. The big obstacle that I think we are all conscious about, on which we need to accelerate progress, on which progress has been very slow, is the issue of research assessment and the incentives and rewards. And until we sort this out, it's like fair data. We're not going to solve it, tomorrow or in a year. But until we accelerate progress in that, because it has been really very, very slow progress, then we're not going to have progress on the other aspects as well. So this is where now our plan is. I mean, we'll work on all aspects of open science. And as you know, we are taking specific initiatives also on reproducibility, which we find it very complementary as an area to work on, also to convince everybody why open science is so important, because open science is also more reproducible science, as we have seen. So, but this year in 2021, we'll give more and more emphasis on the incentives and rewards issue, on the research assessment issue, which is also nicely fits with the political agendas of other parts of the Commission. We'll have maybe at the end of later in the year, or maybe next year, a communication on the university reform, on the future, on the university of the future, if you want, or the digital transformation of universities. So that will be can be an important aspect of that. You know that there is work ongoing, or discussions at least, on reforming the chapters, the charter and code. So it would fit with that. There are many initiatives to which we would like to ride on and launch something major by the end of 2021 on accelerating again the progress we are making for changing the research assessment system. If I may just since I have the floor, to say two short other things. One is to when are we gonna publish the guidelines for Horizon Europe. So we'll publish them, including for research data management.
Kostas, we're losing you.
Yeah, I'm afraid Kostas is.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Now again,
Now,
yes, but we
you're
missed
back.
a couple of sentences.
Okay, I was saying that we are going to publish the guidelines for proposers. So, for example, the annotated grant agreement, the proposal templates that contain guidelines on by April or so. But there will be further guidelines later on for project beneficiaries, so even later. And the second thing is a question from me to everybody. One of the challenges that we'll face with research data management is at the evaluation proposals. So when proposals come in, and as you know, we have evaluators to evaluate the proposal, and not all evaluators are necessarily competent or know very well about data management. We cannot afford to have on every single proposal one specialist evaluator for this. So it's very important to brief the evaluators correctly. And this is the first time for us that we want to evaluate some aspects of this already at proposal stage. I think few funders do it, but there are some that who do. We would appreciate in the future experiences from this, or even slides or briefing material for evaluators, how those of you who have experience as funders in evaluating this data management plan, how do you do it?
Anybody of you would like to come in?
Yeah,
it's a general question. I don't need an answer now. It's at some point.
No,
Okay, just launch to the air.
Kostas, is very simple for us. We don't have any experience in evaluating DMP. So that's the reason why it's not at this time evaluated at the stage of the project, of the evaluation of the project. We just ask for a DMP to be delivered 6 months after starting of the project. So now we will learn, because we have to analyze more than 1,000 DMP. So we'll learn how to evaluate that. We'll have a feedback to the project, to the scientist. And for us, it's a step by step, and we'll learn as well from the evaluation process and the committee, scientific committees, and for the project themselves. So I will answer you in a few months, maybe more.
I think this will be a topic for next year's workshop.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we should come back in a year's time and take stock of the progress of this guidance, but more importantly of this rubric, which is the new tool that we hope that it will be useful.
But I think in the long run, we shouldn't necessarily be doing this. I don't think that funders should in the long run. I think that there is education, there is a pedagogical effort necessary now, but I hope that in the long run, it won't be up to funders anymore to evaluate data management plans. But if we have confidence that within universities and research institutes, there are the necessary structures and personnel, like these famous data stewards, who actually do a good job, who do it, I mean, in the university correctly, and that we have, as funder, if we have sufficient trust that there is these data management plans will be done for each project, that they are being regularly updated, then I think we would not need to have evaluation of all of these thousands of data management plans. We could maybe then from time to time just take a sample to see how is it done. That's what I would hope will happen. So that because I'm not so, I mean, sometimes of course we need to control and evaluate, but what can be done within the universities, and if we know it's well done, well, that's the best that can happen to us.
Yeah, but
I agree.
Mike, with all respect, I think as a funder, you always have to evaluate your proposals. Any proposal you get in, you have to evaluate. So maybe a research data management plan should not be a separate thing, but should be part of the evaluation of the research proposal, if it is a plan in the beginning. And you have to also look at the results of what has been produced. If you say, okay, this money was rightfully given, then there it comes in again to see what has been done with the data. But I fully agree, having it as a separate issue in the future should not be necessary. It should be the norm rather than a separate issue.
Yeah. So what we also, I mean, in the funding at FNR, the funding agency I'm running, we actually will put more emphasis on the in the data management when it comes to end of project reporting.
Exactly.
We will actually not require it for the submission, because we think, well, 2/3 of the proposal will anyway be rejected. So why should we give us? We require that there is a data management plan at project start. So for those proposals that are accepted, we will look at what is there at project start. But we think it's probably more useful to have a more thorough evaluation at the end of project reporting stage.
I agree. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Peter, please come in.
If I may react to this, I think it was wise words that Mark said, that indeed in the long run, it shouldn't be necessary to check that, at least not in detail. Of course, what Karel said also holds some truth, that you will always need to evaluate project proposals. And of course, data management is to become just an ordinary element of research. But in general, I think that indeed the whole topic of data management should become much more a part of the normal university curricula of students and of PhD students, so that they know what is there, and there should be enough support at the level of the university or the institute to support them, because we cannot expect that every researcher is a specialist in all these issues itself. And that's why I also think that what I was presenting about the protocol is important, because that sets actually a norm at the level of the discipline on what is a good practice. And if within disciplines there is agreement on that, they will make sure that it will be included in the normal education of students.
Thank you, Peter. I think we unfortunately need to draw this dialogue to an end. There has been quite an intense discussion in the chat, I think, about some comments here and there. When we don't have time to really address all the comments that have been provided. However, we do take them all into account. And as I said before, Science Europe will continue now the monitoring of the implementation of these guidelines. May I ask all the speakers to turn on their screens to try and get a photo family.
A family picture. A family
of the
picture.
occasion. So as you all have indicated that you don't have a problem in making this public. So I thank you very much for that. I already took the photo. I only would like to thank you very, very much indeed to all the speakers for the excellent presentations. I also would like to thank very much the numerous participants that have been with us and have been contributing to this discussion. Moreover, I would like to thank you to Geraldine for the excellent leadership in guiding this work. But behind that, there's a whole group in Science Europe coordinating the effort, is the group on data sharing and support infrastructures, shared by Stefan Winkler-Nies, who has been sitting quietly during the whole session, but he's been there. And we want to thank him very much publicly for his great leadership. We also, of course, extend the hands to all the universities and research infrastructures that have been very active in contributing to the surveys that we have provided and the drafts that Marie has been providing to all those engaged to come up with this new rubric. I think that it is a successful story of cooperation, which I think is what we need more and more. And I do hope that this will be another example of how good in Europe we can be when we unite our efforts and we cooperate. We need to continue. This is just the beginning after all the effort we've done so far. This is just the beginning, because now, as we have seen in the many comments in the chat, we need to make it work. We need to know what happens when there is no compliance. We need to know how to support better our researchers, and above all, and very importantly, how institutions can take more responsibility for the data that they produce. One last announcement from our part. We are the Data Sharing and Infrastructures Working Group of Science Europe is in the last stages of what we call the matrices. It will be another guidelines for the sustainability of research data. There will be a series of maturity elements that will indicate institutions to what degree their current practice is leading to sustainability of research data. You will receive more news in due time. There will be a launch event later in the year as well, which we will link obviously to this one and to the further developments of the European Open Science Cloud. And I think that with this, I would like to once more thank to everybody for this excellent event and contributions, and see you next time. Thank you very much to all. Bye.
Thank you very much, Lydia, and everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.